welcome back for another episode of the CBSI Hot 10 show. Make sure you go over to comicbookinvest.com and check out the article where I may put a few extra details and tidbits that I don't cover here on the show tonight. And while you're at it, please check out all the other content we have here on the channel. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Make sure that you like, you subscribe, you hit the alert button so you don't miss anything. Keep telling your friends so we can keep growing the channel. And if you want to see this week's Hot 10, don't worry. I'll be back right after this short little break to give you that rundown starting next.
Notable sales.
All right, our first notable sale is a book we actually covered on the TAC show 2 weeks ago when we did a video game rundown. And now we see a CGC 9.8 sell for a huge rebound price. This book, again, was a giveaway that you got when you purchased the Nintendo game way back in, was it 94, I believe it was? Yeah, so back in July 94, you purchased the game, Acclaim gave you a free comic book that basically reprinted part of Spider-Man Unlimited #1, which was part 1 of the Maximum Carnage storyline, to kind of go tie in with the video game. Anyway, this book in a 9.8 sold this week for $2,549, which is a huge bump up from the $1,680 it sold last September. So just 6 months ago, this thing jumped up almost $1,000. So that is a huge rebound in price for this book and an impressive sale for a book that's really not that easy to find. I mean, there's plenty out there, but it's not like you go see it anywhere and any shop that you go into is going to have a copy. Like, it's still kind of tough to track down. And again, an impressive sale nonetheless. Another sale that kind of stood out to me this week was a classic variant this is from back in the day when everybody was following those initial variants, the Delatos, etc. This J.G. Jones Steampunk Wonder Woman is a 1 in 25 variant from 2014. Again, apparently that's kind of like the golden era of incentive variants for us collectors these days. But this number 28 sold this week to 1 in 25 in a CGC 9.6. It hit an all-time high for that grade, selling for $1,530, which again is a big jump up from the $900 it sold just in November. So a few months ago was $900. It jumps up $600 plus to get to that $1,530 mark just this week in a 9.6. Mind you, that's not a 9.8 price. That's a 9.6 price. So pretty impressive stuff when you look at that variant there. Now, we've got the Hot 10 on the way, but before we get there, I want to remind any of you out there who need supplies, use my code RENA10 to save yourself 10% off your entire BCW order. Get your bags, your boards, your long boxes, short boxes, CGC boxes, top loaders, pages for cards, whatever you need to keep your comics and collectibles safe. You can use the link down below, but definitely use the code RENA10 to save yourself 10% off your entire order. I mean, might as well save some money while you got to get that stuff anyway. So use that code and save a few bucks and help out the channel while you're at it. Now, with that all said, I guess it's now time for us to get into that top 10.
Number 10.
And our first book on the top 10 is a repeat from last week, dropping a few spots. We have that second print, 1 in 25, for your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man #1. Yes, this is the animation cover. Basically, they added the dialogue boxes to a cover they already released as part of the original run. They added the dialogue boxes to make it look more like the AF-15 classic. Point being, this 1 in 25 has been getting some monster numbers the last 2 weeks. It made the list with only half dozen sales last week with some big numbers, and it does make the list again, still with only a half dozen sales. So another half dozen sales, but the prices went up even from last week with an average of $210, which again is only 18%. But considering how high that number is, going from, what was it, I think like 170 to 210, that's a big jump. A high of 250 this week is an 11% increase. The fact that it increased at all at the prices that it's at, 210 average, a high of 250 for a book that just came out 10 days ago, that's some crazy numbers. But volumes are still quite low. So even at half a dozen sales, I got to put that into context too. So while a handful of people are willing to spend some big bucks on this book, that doesn't mean the entire market is. So got to keep that in context, and that's why it finds itself here in that number 10 spot. But we're just getting this thing started, so let's keep it rolling and get on to our next book.
Number 9.
So it's been a while since we had a Mark Spears book on the list, but the Mark Spears train still is chugging along with variant after variant, more releases of different covers for monsters, it seems, every week. This week, however, we actually have a Green Lantern book with Green Lantern number 21 coming in here at number 9. This is a 1 in 25 incentive for the recent Green Lantern run. Spears did the cover here. It's already averaging 42 bucks. Granted, it's only about 10 to 12 sales so far this week, but it's only been a couple of days. So you have to put that into context as well. It's only been released since Wednesday. I'm doing this list Friday afternoon. So 10 to 12 sales, averaging 42 bucks already with a high of 59, puts this as an outlier amongst most of the incentive variants we see these days, most of which sell for under ratio. So when one starts breaking out above that ratio mark and starts reaching those double ratio kind of prices, then we start paying attention to it. And that's what we got going on here with this Green Lantern number 21. Now, with that said, we still got a lot of lists to go, so let's keep it on going.
Number 8.
All right, at number 8, we have another book that was on the list last week, but drops a number of spots. This was up near the top last week. This week, it finds itself hanging on at number 8, and this is Spectacular Spider-Man number 15. This book with the Steve Epting cover is the first appearance of the Spider Queen, who again is rumored to be the big bad in the next Spider-Man movie. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know if anybody knows for certain if it's true or not, so we'll see what happens. This did have a big drop in volume. From last week's sales, it went from over 50 to over 20. So a couple dozen sales this week does represent a 54% drop in volume. But mind you, last week had a number of sales in the like $3 range, $4 range. All those cheap copies got cleared up quickly. And then we started seeing those higher prices, which brought up the average, I think, last week to like $8. This week, we're seeing the average pull up to $18, which is 125% increases from last week's averages, and high of 40, which is 150% increase. So those percentages and those increases in prices is why this thing's still hanging on the list, despite the fact that volumes have lowered. Now, I know what you're thinking, like volume doesn't seem like that much, but this week, this actually matters. This was a pretty slow week overall when I started tracking books. Like there weren't a lot of things moving in volume and moving it with higher prices. So some of the higher price jumps are what made the mark this week, even if volumes weren't that high. You'll see more what I'm talking about as we get further down the list. But this one hanging on at number 8 due to those huge increases in price and averages. So whether this plays out to be the case when that movie actually hits, we'll see. But for now, people are starting to invest in this book, I guess, just in case. And we'll see what happens as things play out over the next several months. With that said, let's keep it going and get on to lucky number 7.
Number 7.
And here at number 7, we have a book that I had on the outside looking in last week. Decent amount of volume last week, but plenty of sales were under ratio. $10 sale here, $15 sale there for this 1 in 25. And this is a gorgeous cover. I liked it last week. I like it this week. It's a Yasmin Putri cover for World's Finest number 37. It's a 1 in 25. And like I said, a lot of lower end sales with a couple of outliers. There was like 2 or 3 sales that were like 40, 50 bucks out of the pile we had last week. This week, while volume's not a ton, it's still around, it's over a dozen sales, but the average is now hitting that $50 mark, which was the outlier high last week. So that's 140% increase over the average of last week. And then you add in that the fact that the new high is 73 bucks, which is a 35% jump. Both those things together put this thing on the list as those prices have kind of raised up and stayed there since the end of last week. So impressive sales nonetheless for this book, which I think this is just a cover buy. As far as I'm aware, I don't think anything else really significant happens in this issue. I mean, outside of the Guy Fieri cover you can get, this 1 in 25 cover, I think, is what's really drawn collectors into paying that premium price, because it is a really cool Superman and Batman, opposite directions, mirror images, reverse images, whatever you want to call it. It's just pretty cool. I like it. Now, with that said, let's keep the list rolling and finish off the bottom half of the list with number 6.
Number 6.
And here at number 6, we have the first appearance of Hush. I'm pretty sure this was all the buzz at your shop when you went there this week. Everybody was probably talking about Batman 158, Hush Part 2, Hush 2, Hush 2. DC pushed the heck out of this book. And they had a number of covers for the new release for 158. A lot of variants. They went to ratios as high as 1 in 1000s, 1 in 608s, etc. A lot of push behind that book because it was a classic storyline, and a lot of people did enjoy the original one. So, big push for the second. I'm a big fan of Jim Lee. I was looking forward to it as well, and it is what it is. But with that push for the new book, some interest trickled back to the original one and the original first appearance of the headlining villain here, Hush, who first showed up in the second part of that original storyline in number 609. This book has been a little bit of a ride here or there over the last few months. Volumes popping here and there. Well, we didn't have a huge surge at any one point in time, and prices are still kind of consistent a little bit. They are ticking up over the past week or so. So this is the Batman number 609 Jim Lee cover. We had a couple dozen sales, which is about 31% over last week, averaging $50 raw this week, which is another 31% increase over last week. And we saw a newsstand raw. Those newsies get those premiums sell for $130 this week. So $130 for that newsstand. So check that barcode, look for the newsstand, because as you can see, you can get a nice premium on that book if you can find one. But volume's ticking up, price ticking up. We'll see if that holds, if that continues in the weeks ahead as we continue on with Hush Part 2. Now, that's the bottom half of the list. Let's see what I got for you in the top 5.
Number 5.
Okay, so I mentioned earlier on that volumes were kind of slow this week. Across the board, a lot of stuff, not a ton of volume. So some books like this stand out from the pack now, which may not have been the case in prior weeks when we had some huge volume on some books where they were just selling, for enormous amounts. Here we have the Lucky Devils. So Lucky Devils number 1. This is the third print, 1 in 25 incentive. It's a black and white virgin foil incentive. A lot of words for this one. Third print, Jenny Frison cover. The art is beautiful. It is. It's the same cover as on the regular third print. This is just a black and white shiny foil version of it. But this book has sold, even in low volumes, for some pretty big numbers. Kind of like that Spider-Man book of last week. About a half dozen sales, averaging $100 out of the gate. It's only been out a couple of days. It's already averaging $100 for this 1 in 25, with a high already hitting 150. We'll see if this can maintain, how many more of these can come to market. I don't know how many shops ordered 25 copies of the third print of this Image series, which was kind of interesting, but I don't know. I didn't love it. I mean, it was very reminiscent of 8 Billion Genies to me, but in a different flavor, obviously. But I don't know. We'll see how this goes in the weeks ahead, but those are big numbers for just a couple of days on the market. So this earns itself a spot here at number 5. And with only a half dozen sales, you can't believe what I got for you next with the number 4.
Number 4.
Now, what I have for you now is another later printing. This is a second print for Invincible number 60, part of the Invincible War, which did play out in this past season of Invincible in season 3. So this second print book, which I think I had as a notable sale, because there was an outlier sale a while back that we put on as a notable sale. And I believe we might have had issue 60, the regular edition, make the list that I kept pointing out. Look out for that second print. Look out for that second print. It's selling for a couple $100 these days. That's still the case as Invincible number 60, the second print by Ryan Ottley, saw a handful of sales just this past week. Now, I know what you're thinking. A handful of sales doesn't seem like a lot, but if you factor in the point that this handful of sales, this half dozen sales, represents a third of all of the sales of 2025, and a third of those sales happened this week, that is kind of a bigger deal. It is kind of a bigger number when you consider this book doesn't come up all that often. There aren't too many of these on the market. There's a few out there at auction right now. We'll see where they end up. But this week alone, we saw raw selling anywhere from $350 to $1,200. $350. Another sold for like $510, I think. Another sold at auction for like $1,075, I think was the number. And then yet another book sold for $1,200 raw. And then a CGC 9.8 sold for $1,800. And then I think there was a signature series and maybe a 9.4 that also sold for over $1,000. Just huge numbers for this book, even in low volumes. It could not be ignored. And I don't know. I don't know what the case is, why this came out this week of all weeks. I mean, Invincible Season 3 has been done. Why did this delay happen for these books to sell and these prices? I don't know, but they did. So I had to make note of it, and it earns a spot here near the top of the list because those numbers are ridiculous. But with that said, we still have the top 3 left, so let's see what they are.
Number 3.
All right, climbing up the list this week, we have White Tiger. So, if you guys have been watching Daredevil Born Again, we had 2 episodes drop this week. A double drop of episodes, both of which were probably my 2 favorite episodes of the season, personally. And they didn't even go together. It wasn't even like they were a connecting story. They were almost 2 standalone episodes, really, because we had the bottle episode, and then we had a continuation of the main storyline. But I enjoyed both of them, like, equally, personally. With that, more folks are now still going and cashing in and buying in on that White Tiger craze because we saw little, Del Toro show up in the, past few episodes. Now, this is White Tiger's first solo series. It's a mini series, runs 6 issues. We had this book on the list last week. I think it was near the bottom in like that number 8 spot. But we've seen some increases, and on a lighter week and a slower week, as I keep mentioning, this thing rose up the ranks. So how did this do so? Had another couple dozen sales, so volumes kind of remained consistent to what we had last week, but the prices jumped considerably, with the average raw now hitting $30, which is a 50% jump over last week's $20, and then sets of that mini-series are now running $40 to $55, which is about a 37% increase from last week. It was like $30 to $40. So as you can see, prices are going up. People are buying not just issue 1 here, because they want to get that whole storyline. So they're buying the whole mini in a lot of cases. So a lot of these books are selling, and it's kind of interesting. It's kind of interesting. Even a couple selling in concert with our next book, not to tease it too much, but I do have another book for you coming in at number 2, so let me tell you what it is.
Number 2.
Sticking with that White Tiger, we do have Daredevil number 58, which is her first appearance. So the little niece there on Daredevil Born Again. Daredevil 58, Alex Maleev. She becomes basically the White Tiger during this run. She's introduced here in issue 58, and then part of this Bendis Maleev run, she basically becomes the White Tiger, but she doesn't have the cool costume. So the cool costume doesn't get really brought in till the miniseries, which is why a lot of people are turning to the miniseries along with this. But there are plenty of issues in this Daredevil run you should be mindful of and go keep an eye out for in those cheap boxes, because many of them are still buried there. That said, this issue I had on the outside looking in because I was surprised so many people were buying that White Tiger number 1 and not buying her first appearance. I had this on the outside looking in, telling you keep an eye out for it. And then this week, it pops off with over 40 sales, up over 300% from where we were at last week, because I don't think I only had like 10 sales last week. Averaging $20, hitting highs at 30. I've seen this book sell in lots as well with the White Tiger book, as well as, and for whatever reason, with the Muse number 1. So Daredevil 11 first Muse. So people are kind of making Daredevil Born Again lots and packs where they're trying to sell you lots of books that all connect to the Disney Plus series, kind of all in one. Kind of an interesting angle, interesting take. But we'll see how this does going forward. But that was a big jump from last week and earns itself that number 2 spot. So with that said, that leaves us with only 1 book left. So let's not waste any time and let me tell you what it is.
And our number 1.
And our number 1, repeating at the top, we have The Last Boy, number 1, that Adam Hughes 1 in 25 incentive. Yep, we got a repeat here at number 1. I told you, it was one of those weeks. It wasn't a ton of volume and not a ton of things selling, except those handful of things here on the list that are selling for premiums. And that's mostly the case for this book, because volume-wise, it's near the same. We got about another 30 sales this week. So volume-wise, it remained kind of consistent. But price-wise, averaging $130 this week represents an 80% jump from last week's, I think it was like $72 average, somewhere in that range. The average is near last week's high, basically. And that's the average, with a new high set at $175, which is also a 25% increase from last week's high. So it's those averages and those numbers and prices that are rising, which is why we have a lot of books here remaining on the list from where they were last week. Because, like I told you, not a ton of new stuff was selling. I was looking for all the Marvel releases, all based off of all the names on the chairs. You know what I'm talking about. not a lot of volume jumping. Like a lot of things still sell consistently, but nothing that really stood out from the pack for it to make the list this week. So a lot of things, due to these price increases, earn themselves spots on the list this week. Now, hopefully you enjoyed this. Let me know what you think down in the comments below, but don't go anywhere. Make sure you stick around for the qualified. They're starting up next. The boys got a number of things they're going to cover, including the outside looking in, some more books that I had that didn't quite make the list, and some other things you should probably keep an eye on before next week, because who knows, they might end up here like a few books did this week on the outside looking in. The boys will be covering that, as well as a couple other segments that they do every week. A lot of fun stuff. And they will be talking about some Kickstarter books. So they're doing a sort of a quarterly Kickstarter look in at some Kickstarters you might be interested in and in backing, and check it out. So boys got a lot coming up for you starting next. So stick around. I will be back with more content sooner than later. And with that, take it easy, guys. All right.